Good morning and welcome to AirSage Brewing Data. My name is Robert Kohler, and I want to thank you for taking some time this morning to learn about data with us. A little bit about myself. I'm the CRO at AirSage and a professional transportation planner with 2 decades of experience in the transportation and big data spaces. Today, we're going to be covering some really important topics: mobility and innovation, integrated mobility, sustainability and equity of mobility as a service, and micromobility. With that, I would like to introduce our special guest for today, Juile White. Julie is a Deputy Secretary for Multimodal Transportation at North Carolina Department of Transportation. She has more than 2 decades of experience in public sector work and currently oversees the Integrated Mobility Division. She has been awarded the WTS Women in Transportation Community Advocate Award, the NCDOT Road Gang Award, and the Triangle Business Journal's Women in Business Award. Julie also serves on the board of directors for APTA and is co-chair of the Southeast Rail Corridor Commission. I'm very excited to introduce Juile White to the show. Hello and good morning, Julie.
Morning, Robert.
So it's great having you here today. Thanks for joining us on this wonderful Friday. But I have a huge list of questions and topics for us to discuss. So let's jump right in without further ado. So the term mobility seems to have an ever-evolving definition, even within the same region. To make sure we're all on the same page, what is mobility to you and your team, and what does it mean?
I love that you asked that question, Robert, because I think lately a lot of people throw around words and often have different definitions. So when we think about mobility, we think about how people get from point A to point B, right? So I think that allows that real multimodal approach to the work that we do. And so to that end, we actually made a big organizational change recently at the DOT, or in the last couple of years. We used to have a public transit division and we had a bike and pedestrian division. And we brought those 2 things together, right? Because if you're planning from point A to point B, you're probably doing some walking and you're probably getting on a bus. And then at the end, you're probably doing some more walking or you're getting on a bike. So we needed to plan all the parts of that trip together. So we put these 2 units together and created something new called the Integrated Mobility Division. We really wanted to put ourselves organizationally in a framework to be able to move towards some bigger, more innovative things that were coming at us. I think of the motivation for it. One of the stories that I like to tell is the day the birds landed in Raleigh. So that, of course, was a scooter company, right? Bird scooters. And one morning when we all came to work in downtown Raleigh, there they were en masse, and people were riding them by our building there downtown on the sidewalks, on the streets, going the wrong way in one ways, right? Like there was this immediate uptake and desire for the mode, but as an agency, we weren't really prepared. We didn't see it coming. We didn't have a regulatory or a legal framework or structure for them. And so we said, we need to be more prepared to see that mobility is changing and how are we set up to be successful in that space. So mobility to us is human-centric. How are we going to get people from point A to point B in a multimodal fashion?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it seems every trip, we can jokingly say, begins as a pedestrian and ends as a pedestrian. Either you walk to a bus stop or to your car or whatever, or you get out of your car or off the bus at your final destination, but you're not quite there. So you're definitely going to be walking, which could make every trip multimodal. But now that you have the organization at DOT in a much better place to respond to the challenging landscape of mobility, how are you bringing innovative ideas forward?
So when we created this new unit, the Integrated Mobility Division, we made sure we created a branch within it that we call our Innovations and Data Branch. So our thought process was, let's have a unit that can focus on small deployments of new technologies, figure out if they are useful, if they solve a problem in transportation, if they work. When you try and do something new, it's hard. So work through all the kinks and the issues. And if it's something successful, then we can scale it, take it statewide. If it's not, let's fail fast, shut it down and move on. And so within this data and innovations branch, we've done a number of really interesting innovations that have all, amazingly, all have been successful, and we've worked to scale all of them and won lots of awards.
Excellent. Definitely. A lot of innovation coming out of North Carolina, which is also where I'm located. So happy to hear about that. As a state where 50% of our population lives in rural areas, how are you addressing rural public transit challenges?
That is such a great question. I think oftentimes it's one of those definitional things. Again, when you say transit, people envision New York City Transit or Washington, D.C. Transit. Or in our state, they think about the Charlotte CAT system or the Go Triangle system in Raleigh. But what's really neat about North Carolina is we have 98 public transit systems. Public transit exists in all 100 counties, and that is highly unusual, but puts us in a really great space to think about how do we solve rural transportation challenges. So I'll give you an example of one of the innovative things that we did in this space we're very excited about. Microtransit has really been starting to show itself in urban spaces across the country. So the idea of like an Uber-like product where it's cars or minivans that are deployed sort of to help solve that last mile problem. Maybe you took a rail or a transit system, but now you need to get that last 2 to 5 miles home. Because in a rural context, you think about that last mile is, a little bigger. Well, in the rural space, we had a town call us up, the city of Wilson. They're about 50,000 in size, and they had a fixed route system. It did a loop in their urban area downtown in a town of 50,000. It was a 1-hour headway. So if you had to go to Walmart to get your groceries, you had to catch the bus that comes by once an hour. You had to do your grocery shopping and then again, wait for that bus that comes by once an hour to get you back home. It was an entire 3-hour probably journey by the time you were attempting to be done. It was not convenient. It was not effective. And so the city called us and said, this is ridership's dropping. It's not really meeting our needs. A lot of our major employers are manufacturers. They're on the outskirts of town. It doesn't go there. We'd like to try this microtransit thing, but we're a pretty small community. How do we do this and remain compliant with the FTA? How do we do it without, making massive capital investments in case it doesn't work? And we said, this is great. Let's be partners. So we applied for an FTA grant to help bring some additional resources to bear, because that's a space, we can offer some help in. We helped them ensure they remained FTA compliant. They took the budget that they had for that fixed route system, and they did a turnkey solution with a microtransit product. So that turnkey solution, they took on that risk of the investment in the cars, and they hired the drivers, right? They did all the capital side. And for the same amount of money, they are now offering a 15-minute wait time, a product that you can use conveniently on your phone. You call it with an app. If you have limited mobility needs, it will pick you up at your home. But if you can walk, it'll give you a virtual bus stop, say a block or two away, where it'll pick you up, drop you off where you need to go. We launched this product with Wilson in COVID. And even in COVID, they saw more ridership on this new product than they had on their fixed route system. The uptake has been overwhelming. So we often describe it as like a subsidized Uber. You rode the fixed route bus system for $1.25. You ride this system for $1.25. So we think this is the future of rural transit, and we are really excited about it.
Absolutely. I'm eager to see that type of model deployed in my region and everywhere else. I think that's a great way to look at it at a smaller scale and then figure out how can it be scaled up to the bigger areas that are not New York City, but maybe somewhere between Wilson and New York City. As autonomy continues to grow in the transportation sector, how is NCDOT preparing and responding to advancing technologies in this space?
Autonomy is such an interesting space because it does offer a lot of safety features, right? Humans are very distracted at the wheel. We are seeing that in the data on safety in our transportation network. And so I think autonomy is an exciting opportunity to really explore. And the question for us as a DOT, when we lay concrete or asphalt, is 50 years. So are we designing that and doing projects today that can integrate autonomy that's coming soon in the future? So we went through the process of bringing a fully autonomous transit shuttle to North Carolina. And I will tell you that was not an easy feat to do. Our regulations at the federal level are not really set up for the way that technology is advancing rapidly. And so anytime you do something new and different, it's tough. And we went through that and came through the other side, brought a shuttle to North Carolina. We have deployed it in a couple places, most recently at the Wright Brothers Memorial, which I think is really cool because, of course, that's the first place flight happened. And that was the first time a autonomous shuttle had been deployed in a national park. So I thought it was a really cool thing. And it worked out really well because our national parks obviously are seeing record numbers of visitors. But that one in particular sees a lot of seniors. And it's a hot climate, and you walk a really long way to see it. So the shuttle, particularly for folks with limited mobility, it's air conditioned. They could sit in it. It's tons of glass. They could ride around the memorial, see everything, enjoy that air conditioning, nice and safe, and experience autonomous travel. For us, we learned a lot about mowing cycles. So even a weed growing up on the side of the road can impact the LiDAR and radar. So we know we're going to have to adjust mowing cycles as autonomy comes on. We learned a lot about how it interfaced with curbs. It has a automatically deployed wheelchair ramp, which has to have a certain pitch to it. So how we do our curbs is really important to that. So we're learning all kinds of information already that will help inform how we do our infrastructure going forward. And then another exciting thing, so the autonomy space is both on land and in the air. We brought an e-hang. It is a fully autonomous air taxi and got to do the first time the FAA allowed it to fly in the US. It was really an exciting day to get to see it in action. We all think of the Jetsons and we think that's someday, but that someday is coming much sooner than we think.
Very cool. Speaking of drones, North Carolina is a national leader in using drones to inspect infrastructure, responding to hurricanes and package delivery as well. How do you see unmanned aircraft systems, also UAS, fitting into the transportation network and solving transportation challenges in the future?
I think this is a really exciting area because, our roads are only becoming more congested. And so the air really, offers us a different way to move people and product. So we have a special program we're doing with the FAA. There's only 10 folks who have these in the country. It's part of their Beyond program, and it means that we can work with companies, drone companies, to allow their drones to fly beyond visual line of sight. This is the FAA trying to understand what this looks like, how to prepare the regulations for it so that, again, we can be ready to do this in a bigger way. Through that program, we have done nearly 10,000 drone flights beyond visual line of service. We have moved COVID vaccines. We have done lab deliveries between hospitals and labs. We have seen package delivery of food. So our partners come in and bring their products and test them and advance the understanding of the FAA. And when you think about how much more affordable that can be, right? Rather than having to build more road infrastructure, use the air. And of course, it's greener. They're electric. So, we offer a lot of clean options with that, clean transportation options with that. So I think unmanned aircraft systems are going to be a huge part of our transportation future.
Yeah, definitely. Very, very innovative. And I'm glad to hear you guys are leading the way in that regard. So micromobility solutions have seen a great increase over the past decade. Barring decreases in some regions during the height of the COVID pandemic, what role do you see micromobility playing in the transition to future complete transportation networks?
The thing that struck me about when the scooters came, when those birds landed, was the incredible rate of uptake. I think what we saw is there was this need to move more efficiently in smaller distances that really hadn't been met, particularly in like a downtown type of development. So I think the data, as I recall, told us that about 40% of trips made on our road network are made in a distance of less than 2 miles. And so it's sort of this too far to walk, too short to drive kind of space. And so I think, when there's a transportation need and a product comes in to fill it, it's working when so many people use it. So I think it's going to be a part of our future. I think what we're working toward is how do we build a transportation network that considers all of the users of that space. So I think in the past, we've been very car focused. How do we move the cars through the road, right? How do we push a lot of cars through quickly? And now we're saying, you know what? There's lots of users of the road. There's walkers, there's micromobility, there's bicyclists, and they all need to safely be able to move in that space and use that space. We're focused on our complete streets policy, the idea that all those users of the road need to have a safe way to use that road and move within it. So how are we thinking about our policies, our procedures, our design to make sure that we've considered all of the users? And I think if we can create those safe spaces, we'll see a lot more use of that micromobility.
Great way to look forward to the future. Moving on from that, as a segue for talking about the future, sustainability and equity of mobility as a service and micromobility in North Carolina, hot topics. For mobility as a service promoters, they highlight door-to-door mobility on demand as an objective with a vision of individual freedom and collective efficiency. How is North Carolina DOT preparing mobility as a service, and how will it help address your vision for mobility?
You know, I really do think that's the future. I think about it, you know, we need transportation solutions to be easy. We've all become so used to Google and Amazon, right? Click a product, Amazon Prime has it at my door in 2 hours. Our expectations have, I think, just changed dramatically. So no one wants to say, I'm going to go over to this website and buy a ticket to get on a train. And then I'm going to go over to this website and figure out how to get from the train station to where I'm trying to go and book another ride over here, right? We just want it easy on our phone. So mobility as a service is you go to one app, you say, I'm going from here to here, and it books the whole trip for you, single ticket. It sounds simple, but the backside of that is super complicated, right? So all those various technologies, the app for Uber, the app for Amtrak, the app for our ferries, like they all have to speak to one another. And so what we're doing is looking at the technology side of that right now. We feel like that's the most important first foundational block. So we're preparing an RFP for a statewide set of standards that all of the technology transportation providers would have to meet to come into this so that they are all speaking the same language. And we think that'll be step one to launching what we hope will be the nation's first statewide mobility as a service. You know, nobody is using political lines when they consider their trips, right? So they're like, you know, a solution that only keeps you in your county but your hospital's over a county does you no good. So we don't move within political boundaries. So that's why we like this idea, especially in a state like North Carolina, where people are moving between counties and within regions, that we have a statewide solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Sounds like it could be quite difficult to transition to something like that, at least when you were talking about streamlining into maybe a one-stop app. What are some of the challenges you have found trying to implement mobility as a service?
So we find, first and foremost, every time you try and do something new or different, it's hard. So there's lots of questions because there's lots of unknowns. So we've got lots of partners at the table. You know, you got to have lawyers, you got to have technology experts. You know, we have this whole team of folks around the table trying to ask ourselves, are we contemplating everything that could happen about something we've never done before? So common data standards, frameworks for compliance, what is the funding going to look like? What is the governance structure going to look like? As I said, we have 98 transit systems in this state. So, you know, getting a platform that will work for all those different kinds of transit systems is complicated. Are the laws ready for, you know, the liability? Like, who holds the liability when you buy the single ticket and you're going across all those providers? So I think, you know, sometimes people are like, oh, that sounds really hard and it's going to take months. I think that's the most fun stuff to work through.
Yeah, it definitely seems difficult, but definitely not insurmountable. You guys are doing great work there, and I look forward to the continued movement with that. So integrated mobility and innovative transit projects using big data, reducing costs to improve efficiency for commuters. In your experience working with state, regional, and local governments, what have been some of the ways you have been seeing governments use data to solve these transportation challenges?
So the first thing that comes to mind for me that North Carolina is really known for is our strategic transportation investment law. So in about 2014, our state legislature said, we have all this data and that should be telling us which transportation projects to build, right? So we had a history more of it being sort of more politically driven, who had more political power would get their projects built. But when you have big data, then you can use that to say which project gets you for the least cost, the most benefit, right? Because those are the most logical projects to invest in. And so we've done, I think, an incredible job. And we're again a leader in this space of saying, what are the right data points? How do we bring them together? What are the formulas that should underpin how we pick our projects? And that has been, I think, transformational in our state. It's more transparent. Folks can have more confidence in it. It's fiscally constrained, so it's a realistic picture of what our construction plans will be. So that, to me, is always sort of our first one. I think we did well. And then the next one would be that complete streets project evaluation methodology that I referenced before. So we've done a couple things with data to really think about complete streets. One is we built a transportation demand estimation map. We're looking at all kinds of data points that we've brought together to ask what's the appropriate facility type for this investment. What are the populations that are living in this area? And are there equity considerations that we can tell from big data that tell us where we should be doing investment? What I think is really exciting at a time when we're talking about equity is to be able to look at things like age, poverty, BIPOC populations, zero car households, disabled adult populations. And that helps us zone in on, here's an area that has some transportation challenges and what are the right solutions for that area. So being very data driven about that. And with all of the investment money coming from the IIJA or the bipartisan infrastructure law, being able to use data to say, we're making this great application because it will address these kind of equity concerns. And I can show you the tools we used and the data we analyzed. That makes our grants even more competitive. So I think of those programs as really leveraging data in a really useful way. And then, of course, we've got our transit data. We have vehicle inventory databases, enterprise asset management databases, the National Transportation Database. We have lots and lots of data that we are using to look at our zero emission fleet transition plans. The FTA has a lot of new discretionary grant programs to support clean transportation. And so that's all very data driven as to how we're going to compete for that money and when.
Yeah, definitely a lot of data, a lot of shifts over the past couple of years, and transparency is obviously a big part of it. So as Deputy Secretary of Multimodal Transportation, have you seen a change in focus in North Carolina to utilize big data to transform our existing transportation system?
Absolutely. I really think that what we're doing now is we first say, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And then we immediately look to what are the data sources that can help inform how we're going to solve the problem. So I think it is always step two in our process now. And what's great is we're spending a lot of time thinking about where our data lies, how we structure it, how it's being integrated into what we do, how it's being institutionalized. The last thing you want to do is, have data you're not actually tapping and looking at and making use of. So I think it is, transformed an agency of our size into making sure we're really efficient and effective.
Absolutely. And hopefully it'll keep continuing to move down the line and not only stay in North Carolina, but a lot of other states will follow suit shortly. I can think of a handful of states that are really big into leveraging data. I think there's a lot of room nationwide that we can do. And looking at North Carolina as one example is something that people can pull concepts and ideas and successes from. But changes to transportation systems typically align with comprehensive studies, reviews, and plans. And these changes have environmental, economic, and also social impacts. Can you share some of the challenges you have experienced when working to develop sustainable transportation infrastructure?
Robert, that is a great question because there are a lot of challenges. First and foremost, our policies and laws don't move as quickly as the changes we're seeing, be they in the environment, in the technology side, wherever they are. So we really need to continue to look at those and review them and update them. when it comes to the environment, right, there's so much conversation, you're in Wilmington, around resiliency. Our coast is particularly vulnerable to changes, and we have the ferry system. Last week the nor'easters on our coast were, really tough on our ferry schedule. We saw a lot of flooding up there. A lot of people saw the house in Rodanthe fall in the water on video. So we are doing a lot of research in this space about how do we ensure our facilities and our routes are resilient? What are the changes that we may need to make? Electrifying our fleet, doing a lot of research right now. So it's not as simple as saying, how do you electrify the ferry, but does the grid at the coast support electrification at that level? What are the shoreside components that need to be thought about in order to support that level of electrification? So there's a lot of research happening in that space right now. And then, you talked about sort of comprehensive studies and reviews. We have, as you said, sort of a lot of our state is still rural. So how are we thinking about connecting our rural communities to our urban communities and growing those rural communities through rail opportunities? So we have a really robust rail network, in Wilmington, a very robust rail network in our state. And how do we use that to try and encourage growth and economic opportunity in the rural parts of our state through transit-oriented development? So you are absolutely right. Everything starts with a plan. And then from there, we can ask ourselves, how do we fund that plan? And now we get to look to the bipartisan infrastructure law for that funding.
Yeah, definitely. And one of my favorite things of North Carolina, we have so many different types of transportation. And you would know with your role, we've got ferries, which is only a thing in quite a limited number of markets. We have rail, we have light rail, we have buses, we have pretty much everything you can think of. And the typical bird scooters floating around cities, I hope we continue to see them, just not stacked up on day one. I think there was that adoption and learning curve, and I think we've gotten a lot better there. So this has all been very, very great, informative, and I've really enjoyed talking with you today. Hopefully our guests have also equally learned a lot of opportunities and things that you guys have been succeeding at, and happy we can share this with our viewers. But before we leave, I want to say I hope everybody can join us next week when we have George Thiel on the show. George is a traffic industry specialist at SICK Inc. He's responsible for rail, tolling, transit, and transportation. He has more than 30 years of experience in designing safety systems, and he is an expert in automated guided vehicles and a leader in developing LiDAR, radar, and vision-based technologies. Julie, thank you very much for your time today, and I hope everybody can join us next week for Brewing Data. Thanks and have a great weekend.